Introducing the Redstockings Manifesto, an extremely comprehensive and concise representation of the competing alternative view, which will serve as our context. The word red stockings is a reference to the term blue stockings, which was commonly used to describe academically inclined women, combined with a reference to Marxism, which was commonly associated with the color red. After centuries of individual and preliminary political struggle, women are uniting to achieve their final liberation from male supremacy. Red Stockings is dedicated to building this unity and winning our freedom. Women are an oppressed class. Our oppression is total, affecting every facet of our lives. We are exploited as sex objects, breeders, domestic servants, and cheap labor. We are considered inferior beings whose only purpose is to enhance men's lives. Our humanity is denied. Our prescribed behavior is enforced by the threat of physical violence. Because we have lived so intimately with our oppressors, in isolation from each other, we have been kept from seeing our personal suffering as a political condition. This creates the illusion that a woman's relationship with her man is a matter of interplay between two unique personalities and can be worked out individually. In reality, every such relationship is a class relationship, and the conflicts between men and women are political conflicts that can only be solved collectively. In 1969, when this manifesto was first published, this ideology was known as radical feminism. Before long, though, it became the politically dominant feminist view, and now it's the politically dominant view, period, as it has since become well established and firmly entrenched in public policy, the mainstream media, academia, government, non-governmental organizations, multinational corporations, and the culture at large. I want to draw your attention to the part where women are described as exploited as sex objects. They did not actually use the trendy feminist term objectification, but yet that's exactly what they're talking about. For Karl Marx, objectification of labor was both a foundation of and a product of the capitalist mode of production, more specifically as a consequence of commodification and commodity fetishism. For feminists, the objectification of women both results from and contributes to a system of female subordination to men. The term rape culture cannot be found here either, because the concept was developed a few years later. But the basic idea behind the concept of rape culture is here in the notion that men collectively police and control the behavior of women through the constant threat of violence. The idea is that men collectively use rape instrumentally as a tool to intimidate, silence, and punish uppity women with the goal of keeping all women down. Modern feminists today frequently claim that rape is really about power and control. Susan Brownmiller in 1975 said that rape is a conscious process of intimidation by which all men keep all women in a state of fear. These two notions of rape culture and objectification would later become two of the major themes behind the global Slut Walks protest movement. They also claim that women are exploited as breeders. Hence, the natural process of reproduction is viewed as yet another form of oppression. This is where the my body, my choice position on abortion is coming from. It's not some gender-neutral principle that all human beings should have a right to veto their own reproduction. It's not my offspring, my choice. Rather, the focus is on men's reproduction and on women's liberation from having their bodies used by men for men's reproduction. Rather than viewing reproduction as nature's imperative, they frame it as men's imperative specifically. The big irony here, by the way, is that opinion polls clearly show that men in general are actually more pro-choice than women are, and that women are more pro-life than men are. This is not what you would expect if women were truly exploited by men as breeders, but I digress. They also describe women as domestic servants and cheap labor. They never mention the wage gap here, but you can see where those concerns that ultimately fuel the wage gap myth are coming from. The whole concept of the family unit, a family income, and a family's standard of living is conspicuously absent here. You would think that if one's spouse were to get a big promotion, that this would be a very sad day for you, because rather than being happy about enjoying a higher standard of living, you should be very jealous of your spouse for being the one to earn that extra money. The homemaker lifestyle is viewed as oppression rather than privilege. That's the logic of this point of view. There is no such thing as a family unit under this view. The actual word patriarchy is never used in this manifesto, but when they say that women's prescribed behavior is enforced by the threat of physical violence, they are talking about patriarchy. That's patriarchy theory in a nutshell, and this is where the violence against women advocacy is coming from. This is the gender lens through which they view all domestic violence, rape, sexual harassment, and even manspreading and mansplaining. You've probably heard the famous feminist slogan, "The personal is political." Again, this manifesto clearly explains what that slogan means. They do not view conflicts between men and women as individual conflicts, but as part of a larger collective conflict. And the way that they respond to these conflicts is informed by that view. Here, they are applying the Marxist model of class conflict to the sexes, arguing for unity and solidarity amongst women in their struggle against their common enemy, men. The idea that women who choose to sleep with men are sleeping with the enemy is also a core idea behind political lesbianism, lesbian feminism, and lesbian separatism. As a consequence of this, along with the development of queer theory and Judith Butler's notion of gender performativity, feminist activism has historically been very closely allied with LGBTQ advocacy and activism. We identify the agents of our oppression as men. Male supremacy is the oldest, most basic form of domination. All other forms of exploitation and oppression, racism, capitalism, imperialism, etc., are extensions of male supremacy. Men dominate women, a few men dominate the rest. All power structures throughout history have been male-dominated and male-oriented. Men have controlled all political, economic, and cultural institutions and backed up this control with physical force. They have used their power to keep women in an inferior position. All men receive economic, sexual, and psychological benefits from male supremacy. All men have oppressed women. Again, the word patriarchy is not actually used here, but this is an excellent summary of patriarchy theory. When feminists use the word patriarchy, this is the overall picture of reality that they're referring to. This section of the manifesto anticipates and defends against various common counterarguments so that these can be quickly dismissed. It also reinforces and elaborates on their overall gender conflict worldview. Attempts have been made to shift the burden of responsibility from men to institutions or to women themselves. We condemn these arguments as evasions. Institutions do not oppress, they are merely the tools of the oppressor. To blame institutions implies that men and women are equally victimized, obscures the fact that men benefit from the subordination of women, and gives men the excuse that they are forced to be oppressors. On the contrary, any man is free to renounce his superior position, provided that he's willing to be treated like a woman by other men. We also reject the idea that women consent to or to blame for their own oppression. Women's submission is not the result of brainwashing, stupidity, or mental illness, but of continual, daily pressure from men. We do not need to change ourselves, but to change men. The most slanderous evasion of all is that women can oppress men. The basis for this illusion is the isolation of individual relationships from their political context, and the tendency of men to see any legitimate challenge to their privileges as persecution. So yeah, women are the victims, men are the oppressors. They also claim that men need to change, but that women are just fine the way they are. Men are bad and women are good. This emphasis on the need to change men is also behind many of the attacks on masculinity, the demonization of men, the criminalization of men, and misandry in general. This is where a lot of the talk about reforming masculinity and toxic masculinity is coming from. You see, feminists do deal with men's issues. It's men who are oppressing women, so it's just as important to talk about men's issues. There's also a general position on trans women here. Any man is free to renounce his superior position, provided he's willing to be treated like a woman by other men. So being born a man does not determine your fate. You have options. You can voluntarily step down and renounce your superior position. It's not a promise to recognize a trans woman as a woman, to grant her access to women's spaces, or to be fully trusted as an ally. It's simply stating that those men who refuse to undergo some sort of transition are guilty because they still benefit from the subordination of women. Male privilege is also introduced here, long before Peggy McIntosh made this concept popular. This concept has been very useful for dismissing any complaints or claims of victimhood from men as further evidence of privilege. Men are, by definition, blind to their own privilege, and so they're not capable of forming an informed opinion on it. Here, the very idea that a man could ever be the victim of a woman is not just considered wrong, but also highly problematic. This section also explains why certain feminists are so hostile to men's rights activists and anyone with an ounce of common sense who decides to weigh in on their subject matter with an alternative viewpoint. This worldview ultimately stems from how they view conflicts between men and women. They see a collective conflict as opposed to individual conflicts. The most important line in this section is the following: men benefit from the subordination of women. This statement really cuts to the core of this ideology. If you believe that men do benefit from the subordination of women, then implicitly you also accept this gender conflict model as an accurate description of reality. And if you don't believe that men as a group benefit from the subordination of women as a group, then you're probably thinking that this manifesto sounds like the paranoid ramblings of a lunatic. Next we have the feminist class consciousness, false consciousness, consciousness raising, and feminist epistemology. This is a summary of standpoint theory and the feminist emphasis on feelings over facts, subjectivity over objectivity, intuition over logic, women's lived experiences over male experiences, and hostility towards science. We regard our personal experience and our feelings about that experience as the basis for an analysis of our common situation. We cannot rely on existing ideologies as they are all products of male supremacist culture. We question every generalization and accept none that are not confirmed by our experience. Our chief task at present is to develop female class consciousness through sharing experience and publicly exposing the sexist foundation of all of our institutions. Consciousness raising is not therapy, which implies the existence of individual solutions and falsely assumes that the male-female relationship is purely personal, but the only method by which we can ensure that our program for liberation is based on the concrete realities of our lives. The first requirement for raising class consciousness is honesty, in private and in public, with ourselves and with other women. In this section, we see the seeds of what would later become third-wave feminism and what's now often referred to as intersectional feminism. This project requires that women be united, and towards that end, they need to make an effort to be inclusive without being divisive. We identify with all women. We define our best interest as that of the poorest, most brutally exploited woman. We repudiate all economic, racial, educational, or status privileges that divide us from other women. We are determined to recognize and eliminate any prejudices we may hold against other women. We are committed to achieving internal democracy. We will do whatever is necessary to ensure that every woman in our movement has an equal chance to participate, assume responsibility, and develop her political potential. We call on all of our sisters to unite with us in struggle. We call on all men to give up their male privilege and support women's liberation in the interests of our humanity and their own. In fighting for our liberation, we will always take the side of women against their oppressors. We will not ask what is revolutionary or reformist, only what is good for women. The time for individual skirmishes has passed. This time, we're going all the way. So in essence, this viewpoint assumes that the collective interest of females is opposed to the collective interests of males. It also treats gender as analogous to class, claiming that it's socially constructed and hierarchical. The overall goal is to overthrow patriarchy, and this can be accomplished through ensuring that powerful positions are occupied by women, through rejecting and subverting all gender norms, and through discouraging male violence and aggression against women, while simultaneously encouraging female violence and aggression against men. But the core idea is that there is a gender conflict, a gender struggle, and a gender war.